You know, this isn't just a story about a gun. It's really about a collision of two worlds happening on these tiny, blood-soaked islands in the middle of the Pacific. On one side, you have an empire that truly believed a warrior's spirit was the most powerful weapon of all, that pure courage could beat any material disadvantage. And on the other side, an industrial giant that had basically turned the act of war into a mechanical process. Right at the heart of it all is this one rifle. A rifle that didn't just fire bullets, it fired a brutal, world-changing idea. Okay, let's get into it. So here's how we're going to break this down. First, we'll look at that clash of doctrines. Then, we'll introduce the factory-made weapon at the center of this story. After that, we'll see what happens when these ideas finally meet on the battlefield. Then we'll explore the huge consequences of that meeting. And finally, we'll pull out a lesson in power that, honestly, still echoes today. I want you to just picture the scene for a second. It's November 20th, 1943, the island of Betio. You've got thousands of Japanese defenders dug into these incredible fortifications, absolutely convinced of their spiritual superiority. What they don't know is that they're about to face an enemy with a totally different way of thinking about war, and the result is going to be nothing short of devastating. Okay, so this slide really gets to the core of it. You're looking at two completely different ideas about how the world even works. The Imperial Japanese Army was built around this concept of soshin, this deep, unshakable belief that a soldier's spirit, their willingness to die for the emperor, was stronger than any machine. The American way of thinking? The total opposite. It was cold, it was calculated, and it was all about industrial might. Just overwhelm the enemy with so much firepower that their will to fight doesn't even matter anymore. One side believed in the soul of the warrior, the other believed in the output of the factory. And if you want proof of just how deep this belief ran, look at this. This wasn't just some raw propaganda. This was their official military science. Their own training manual, still being used decades later, spent 17 pages on the glory of the bayonet charge and the power of the human spirit. And automatic weapons, yeah, they got 2 paragraphs, a footnote. It was a belief system that was about to be tested in the most brutal way you can imagine. So now, let's meet the machine that was going to shatter that belief. This is the Browning automatic rifle, the BAR. But I don't want you to think of it as just a 19-pound piece of steel and wood. I want you to see it for what it really was, the physical embodiment of America's entire philosophy of industry, put directly into the hands of the average soldier. I mean, the specs themselves are pretty impressive, right? A heavy-hitting .30-06 round, firing up to 650 rounds a minute. But the really crucial part is that last line, the democratization of firepower. See, before the BAR, that kind of power belonged to heavy machine guns that needed a whole crew to operate. The BAR gave all that to a single soldier who could run and crawl and fight with it. It meant every single American squad had this incredible base of automatic fire. And this is the point where the American industrial doctrine stops being just a concept and becomes a number, a massive number. Over the course of the war, American factories pumped out about 350,000 BARs. To a military power like Japan, that number was it was almost impossible to comprehend. And to really get a sense of that scale, look at this. Just one company, New England's Small Arms, made almost half of all of them. This wasn't about craftsmanship anymore. This was the brutal, relentless efficiency of the assembly line, applied directly to the tools of war. But honestly, for me, this number right here tells the whole story. 20,000. That's how many BARs were made by IBM. Yeah, that IBM. The typewriter company. When the people who make your business machines are also cranking out advanced automatic rifles, your entire nation has become an arsenal. I mean, how is a warrior spirit supposed to compete with that? This chart just lays it all out, doesn't it? It puts that industrial difference in the starkest terms possible. The US made 350,000 bars, just the bars. Japan in total produced about 94,000 of all its light machine guns combined. That's nearly a 4-to-1 advantage in just this one weapon category. From the very start, it was an unwinnable equation. All right, so we have the clash of ideas, and we have the difference in machines. Now let's go to the battlefield, to places like Guadalcanal and Saipan, where this whole philosophical debate gets settled by the cold, brutal, and totally unforgiving math of combat. So here's what's so important. It's what happens in the first few seconds of a firefight. A Japanese rifle squad, right, they can maybe get off 65 aim shots in a minute. But a US Marine squad with its 3 BARs, they could put 150 rounds downrange in the first 4 seconds. Think about that. Before a Japanese soldier could even work the bolt on his rifle to fire a second time, he was already facing a storm of lead. Spirit doesn't mean a thing when it's met with that kind of instant violence. The Japanese were smart. They adapted. They built these amazingly complex cave and bunker systems meant to be unbreakable fortresses. But the BAR turned their greatest strength into a death trap. The U.S. Marines developed a standard, almost mechanical procedure. You didn't need to be a hero, you just needed to follow the steps. A BAR gunner fires a 20-round magazine into the cave opening. Those high-velocity bullets would just ricochet off every surface, the walls, the ceiling, the floor, creating what they called a hornet's nest. The defenders inside died without ever seeing who killed them. It was combat as an industrial process. And the impact? It went way beyond the physical. Veterans from both sides, they all talked about the sound. The BAR had this unique, deep, rapid thudding, like rolling thunder. And that sound meant automatic firepower wasn't just in some fixed position anymore. It was everywhere. It was moving, it was hunting you, and it was close. For Japanese soldiers who were taught their fighting spirit was invincible, that sound was the death knell of their entire worldview. It was the sound of an idea dying. Well, the outcome of this clash was pretty much inevitable. But the story doesn't just stop with the last battle. The legacy of this industrial lesson would end up having these profound consequences, not just for Japan, but for the entire world. The numbers, they're just horrifying, and they tell the final story of this collision. For every one American serviceman killed in the Pacific, more than 20 Japanese soldiers died. This wasn't a contest between equals. This was an industrial power systematically taking apart a pre-industrial military. But if we really want to understand the impact of this weapon and the system that created it, we have to look past the casualty reports. Because its real targets, they were much, much bigger than the men in the caves. The BAR and everything it stood for proved beyond any shadow of a doubt that the path of Japanese militarism was a dead end. It showed that no amount of fighting spirit, no matter how courageous, could stand against the productive power of an industrial democracy. The very foundation of the ideology that led Japan into war was completely shattered by the undeniable reality of American firepower. And here is the great irony in all of this. After the war, Japan didn't reject the lesson of the BAR. They mastered it. The Japanese leaders who saw American industrial might up close understood that real power didn't come from conquering land, it came from industrial capacity. Japan's economic miracle was built by applying the exact same principles of mass production and technological excellence that the BAR represented. The weapon that defeated them, well, it ended up becoming their teacher. So, what's the big takeaway here? Well, the lessons that were learned in the Pacific didn't just stay in the Pacific. They sent a shockwave across the entire globe that totally reshaped military thinking and our very idea of what makes a nation powerful. The rest of the world was absolutely paying attention. The BAR proved that giving every small infantry unit its own automatic weapon was the future of war. The Soviet Union saw this and immediately accelerated its own programs, which led directly to the AK-47. The whole focus of military training started to shift away from pure marksmanship and towards the systematic use of firepower. And maybe most importantly, the true measure of a nation's strength wasn't just the size of its army anymore. It was the output of its factories. So, in the end, that's really the story. It's the story of an idea, the idea that spirit is supreme, that was violently and completely proven wrong. And from the ashes of that dead idea, a new, peaceful, and prosperous Japan was born, right alongside a new, and frankly, more terrifying understanding of what modern war had become. And that kind of brings us to today, doesn't it? The factories have changed, for sure. Now they produce microchips and software instead of rifles. But that fundamental question is still there, and it's something worth thinking about. In our world right now, where does a nation's real strength come from? Is it still about the spirit and ideology of its people? Or has the cold, hard math of production and technology become the only thing that really matters?